Hello, nice to meet you. After activities in our Da Nang Art for Children gallery, the children go downstairs to play some games in our tea shop. Several of them want to play chess and want me to teach them. Unfortunately, I don't have time for that. So I made these videos for the parents who come with them so they can teach their own children at home. And for the other young children, we have a good chess teacher once in a week. And on the other side of Da Nang, there is an excellent chess school. My name is Robbie and I make exhibitions, develop educational projects and do guiding. Hence my tendency to tell a bit more than is strictly necessary. So for any sport you start with a warm-up and then your trainer explains a few things about the sport and the muscles you use for it and so on. Chess is no different. You can start playing right away and then you make the kind of mistakes that you do not recognize. You make them again and the next game after and a few games later, and so you're so used to making those mistakes that it becomes very difficult to unlearn them later. So I hope that with these videos I can help you to avoid them. And for muscles, most important is that your brain got enough oxygen. Okay. Playing a game of chess is not just making moves on the board. It's a very social activity. During the entire game, you try to understand someone else. Some see the other as an opponent, others see them as somebody or someone they can learn from. When former world champion Anatoly Karpov was watching the games of amateurs, people asked him why he did that while he's a world champion. And he replied, well, amateurs sometimes make very interesting moves, even they don't know it always. So what he did was looking carefully at the situation on the board. And that is one of the most important things one have to learn as a beginner, especially before you make your move. Why you have to pay extra attention on this, I explained that with this game as example. We know how the pieces move, and we know that the minor pieces, the bishop and the knight, they have the most possibilities in the center. From the center you can also go in all directions, which is why you can more or less say that the vast majority of chess games start with a fight in the center. Center is the squares d4, d5, e4 and e5. Controlling the center can be done directly with the pawns or indirectly with the minor pieces. And the game starts with the pawns. Well, this game. Because white is allowed to make the first move, white determines what kind of game it will be. Basically, you have two types of openings. You can start on the queen side or on the king side. If you choose to open on the king side, you often end up with what we call an opening play. This is because the battle starts immediately and, well, that's where the king is and you attack the king. A very common move is e2 to e4. And with this move you occupy the center. Black then chooses to occupy the center, whether his pawn, play from e7 to e5, but black could also immediately attack your pawn with another pawn, for example playing d7, d5. Or he can attack the pawn with a piece by playing the knight from g8 to f6. Black could also first play b6, and then the next move brings a bishop from c8 to b7 to attack the pawn on e4. But after b6, white probably plays bishop f1 to c4. And then you get this position. Black has now made two moves and is now treating to capture the white pawn on e4. White, on the other hand, is treating the weak pawn on f7 with the bishop. And as a reminder, the king is protected by 3 pawns on the d, the e and the f files, and the pawns on the d and the e files are initially protected by 4 pieces, but the pawn on the f line is only protected by the king. White is now on the move and he will probably play knight f3. He's not worried about the pawn on e4, because if black captures that pawn, what happens then? Well, white now has the choice of simply winning back the pawn with bishop c4 takes the pawn on f7. We check, the king has to take the bishop. White now checks on g5 with his knight. The black king can now best retreat, and after which the knight takes the black bishop on e4. In terms of pieces, the position is in balance, but black can no longer castle, and white now occupies the center. And also, when you think you can win a pawn, more specifically the center pawn, and then it turns out that this is not the case, while your position has become worse, well, that's not a good start for a game. Instead of taking on f7, white can also immediately attack the bishop on e4 by playing the knight to g5. If black then mainly thinks about saving his bishop and taking pawns, there's a good chance that he will take the unprotected pawn on g2, after which white will take with the bishop on f7, and that is checkmate, as you can see on the diagram. This is a very short game, but we can learn a lot from it. With e4, white chooses to occupy the center with the pawn, and he plays on the side of the king. So he goes especially with the bishop on c4, which looking at the weak f pawn for a direct king attack. Black does enter the battle attacking the e pawn in the center, but does nothing do to defend his weak king's pawn. It is also cost him 2 moves to develop that bishop. White used those moves to develop both the bishop and his knight. And in the sequel we see that black still does not actually pay attention to what white does. In addition, black mainly sees that he can win a pawn and take control over the center. It is clear that black does not look at what is going on the entire board, which is why when white plays the knight to g5, black mainly sees that his bishop is being attacked, and then he sees that unprotected pawn on g2, but chess is not about winning a pawn. And here we see one of the most important shortcomings. In this video we see the entire diagram, but chess players, they do not see the entire board during the game, and that may sound a bit strange, but it's true. And they discover this by analyzing the viewing behavior of blind chess players. They look by touching the pieces with their fingers, and which pieces they touch is easy to follow. And in this way it was possible to see per move and during the development of the game what the blind chess players were looking at. And what did they see? Well, a game is a series of moves and the total situations change every time. It became clear from the research with the blind chess players that we see an increasingly smaller part of the total and concentrate more and more on where the battle is taking place. And the same thing happened in this game. The black player concentrated on the knight attacking the bishop in the center, and the rest he did not see as a beginning player. And well, this is how black sees the situation. It's indicated with blue, and we see that the pawn at f7 fell outside the field of vision. That is why bystanders see it, but the players themselves do not see it. So for this game, the fight starts about the center. It is impossible to see all possibilities. So we have to limit ourselves and not look at everything the whole time. But we mainly look at what is relevant or what we think is relevant. And that varies a lot. It depends on how strong the player is. A great master only needs a fraction of a second to survive an entire position and see who is better and why. That may sound not realistic, but compare it to traffic. Someone who arrives at a busy intersection only needs a fraction of a second to judge the situation and decide how to act. And that is often a matter of life and death. So the weaker the players are, the more time they need and the less they see, even though they have all the time in the world. You have to recognize things, and that means that you have to know them in order to recognize them. But first, the fact that I always use the term he, it is only for convenience, and not because the strongest chess players are almost all men. And that is not because they are better, but because there are simply many more of them playing chess. And there is also a very good reason why there are fewer women who play chess. That dates back from not long ago, from the time when women were not admitted to universities. And at universities, it's where the chess was very popular and where most of the chess clubs started. Thus women couldn't practice with the better chess players. Nevertheless, early at the last century, exception came. And most famous was Vera Menchik. She was British and I think the first professional woman chess player. And the photo here is very typical for that time. All men standing there looking at the only chess playing woman. She was playing on the highest level, and of course she also won some of her games. The reason for one of the players to say during a tournament, "Oh, those losers, they had become the members of the Vera Menchik club." Well, during the same tournament, he himself became the next member of the club. And the club grew bigger and bigger, with several grandmasters and members like former world champion Max Euwe. When I had lessons from Euwe, he told me that it was a shame that she had died so young. She was really a very nice person and had a very interesting positional style of playing. The photo also reminds me of a painting of my father, who was one of the strongest chess players in Belgium at the time. And he was also a portrait painter. Those are all self-portraits that he painted over the years. You see him at different ages and dates from the same time as a photo of Vera Menchik. Well, in any case, never underestimate your opponent. Normally, we start by choosing an opponent. My advice is do not play against much stronger players in the beginning. They see a lot of your shortcomings that you don't see at all, with the result that you do not understand why you are suddenly completely lost. You learn almost nothing from that. On the contrary, you start to believe that you're not smart enough to learn to play chess forever. So a player of your own level, they make more or less the same mistakes as you do. So you can learn from that when you analyze the game together afterwards. That is why you have to write down the game. And a good analysis is when you, for example, name 5 good moves of your opponent and why you like those moves. And your opponent names 5 good moves of you and why he likes them. This is much better than saying which moves you thought were bad. It's more positive, and in general, do beginners not really know what are bad moves. But when you talk about why you thought it was a good move, you're talking about your own experience. And that can lead to an interesting conversation like, did you see the same? Another play. When we are going to play, we're sitting behind the board and see all those pieces, and then you think, if I play with this pawn, what will my opponent do? So you try to think a few moves ahead, because you often heard that someone, great chess players, they can think 10 moves ahead. Well, just let's do the math. When we start, we have, let's say, 5 good possibilities. There are many more, but 5 counts easier. Black also has 5 good answers to each of those 5. So that's 25 possibilities after one move. To each of those 25 possibilities of white has again 5 answers. And to each of those 125 possible moves, black has also 5 answers. So we are then, after 2 moves, already on 625 possibilities. There is therefore little point in trying to think a number of moves ahead, especially when a game starts. Good chess players do think in positions and possibilities. Of course, professional players, they can spend a lot of time to learn all variations of a certain opening, and then they know from that specific opening up to 20 moves. However, not long ago, Magnus Carlsen, the strongest chess players in the world today, played what is considered one of the worst opening moves there is, to play pawn h2 to h4. And his opponent wasn't able to win, he almost lost that game. So I think you're much better off when you are used to play based on understanding of what you see on the board than on series move you have learned by heart. Well, as we saw already, before you first move, you have to choose what kind of game you're going to play. With e2, e4, you play on the king side. That's mainly tactical and fast. If you don't like that, you can also start occupying the center with your queen pawn, d2, d4, like here. So if you choose to start on the queen's wing, you will usually end up in what we call close plays. An open game is when there is no pawn anymore on the line. You can also see the big difference right away. After e2, e4, white could develop his bishop from 4 f1 to c4 and attack the weak fc pawn, f7 pawn. After d2, d4, this is not possible. Now you can develop your bishop from c1 and you can develop him to f4 because your pawn on d4 covers square e5, and white can later with the bishop from f4 also cover the square e5. But white can play something else. For example, he can develop his bishop to g2. We saw in the previous video that the bishop is aimed at the black king's position. From there, and then he can do very annoying things like mating here, a diagram from the previous video. So with the bishop on b2, we go for a close position. This means that one builds up quietly and strategic. Suppose white decides to go for his bishop onto the, and when after 7 moves he ends up with this position. The moves were first d4, black answer d5, then white plays knight f3, black answer knight f6, then white plays e3, black plays e6, then white develops his bishop f1 to e2, black does the same, f8 to e7, then white do the short rocket, black also a short rocket, then white plays b2, b3, and now the black plays knight to c6. And white plays now the bishop to b2, and black plays his bishop to d7, and that's the position we have now. And this is a typical closed position. Very difficult for beginning players to see what could be played. That is why it's good to look calmly at the position to see what is possible and what is not. All those moves were really normal moves. You can play them without any problems. We see that the white bishop is facing his pawn on d4. And that pawn cannot move ahead because it's blocked by the black pawn on d5. So that limited the possible movements of that bishop on b2. The black bishop on the black squares is not blocked by its own pawn, so it can move a lot. But the black bishop on the white squares is also blocked by the pawn on e6, but that pawn itself is not blocked by a white pawn on e5. So when black wants to further develop his bishop on d7, he can play the pawn from e6 to e5. When white wants to prevent this, he can block that with, well, not with a pawn, but with his knight. In his mind, white can see how it will go if he played his knight from f3 to e5. e5 is a nice square for the knight, so it's good to look at it already. Black now has a knight on c6, so after knight goes to e5, he can capture that knight with his knight, and then black takes back with the pawn d4, takes that black knight on e5. The e5 pawn now attacks the knight on f6, and that knight, it just can go to e4, and then we get the following position. And when we look at this position, we see now that the black pawn on e6 is blocked with the white pawn on e5, but that pawn is not protected by another pawn. We could play f2, f4, but then the pawn on e3 is no longer protected by another pawn, and after f4 we cannot longer get rid of the knight on e4 by playing the f pawn to f3. So white now has also two pawns on the e file, we call that a double pawn, and that's usually not so good. Black now has 4 pawns on the queen side, while white only has 3 of them. Black can then choose to start the battle on the queen side. White must then find some treats on the king side, but they are not yet so clear how to do that. In short, as long as black has a knight on c6, white can better wait with playing his knight to e5. Also, black cannot play e6, e5 for the time being. That pawn will simply be captured. Now, let us look back at the position before we considered the knight f3 to e5. The black bishop on the black squares has too much freedom of movement, while my bishop on the black squares hasn't. What if I now play my bishop to a3 and exchange the bishops? The bishop is covered by the knight on b1. When he takes my bishop, I take his bishop with my knight. That knight is then developed and covers the square c4. Of course, black still can play his knight from f6 to e4. And then, what does it look like when I play pawn c2, c4? You see that on the next diagram. And we see that black is still more cramped, while white now has more room to move, which is often a good sign. Black can play his knight to c3, and then he attacks both the queen and the bishop. However, because white has a lot of room to move, it's easy to bring its queen to a good field. And if black takes the bishop on e2, after white plays his queen, for example, to c2, he loses a strong knight on e4. That's not a good exchange. White now has a possibility to play his rook to c1 and can then indirectly attack the pawn on c7. He can in fact throw open the c file by taking on d5. He can also play c5, which gives black even less room to move. So this is typical of how you play closed games. Not as spectacular as a king attack, but trying to understand the characteristics of a position well. And we see that white initially played his bishop to b2 in order to later threaten the black king's position from there, but then it turns out that exchanging the bishops gives white more possibilities, and so we change our plans for the new one. So we started on the queen's wing. For attacks on the king's position, you can find loads of examples on the internet. And for those who wonder why I don't recommend specific openings, while this is done in many books, most existing chess books for beginners from the past, they start with listening the moves that grandmaster plays in various openings, and then you just have to play them again and again and again while hoping that you can remember them. It was only when Aaron Nimzowitsch published his book My System, with a vision that one should not guided by a series of moves with a grandmaster who has won, but that you should play based on positional situations and possibilities. And when I was studying for chess instructor, we did study his and other new methods and found them more instructive to teach than to list the first move on all kind of openings. Because that is no use to you, because when you know the moves, but when the other person doesn't know, when they play variations that you don't know, so it doesn't work. They're still doing that in some books. The good chess books, they don't do that, but a lot of books, they still do that, because it's just easier to publish a few lists of moves than to explain why they are played. For now, I want to show that when white chooses to play a closed game, black does not have to go along with it. Black can then, often with the help of a gambit, throw the position open. A gambit is when you sacrifice something so that you can quickly develop your pieces while the other is busy collecting the sacrificed material. As a beginner in playing, you should play a lot of gambits. Existing gambits, or just invent your own gambit. In 1930, the Swedish player Fritz Englund sponsored a big tournament where everyone had to play the gambit that he loved. And I will talk about it right now. It's a good opening to play for black. The opening arises after black answers d4 with e7, e5. Black therefore gives away a pawn. The only compensation for black is that it's now his turn, and that the new game has become more open, meaning you have to play offensively. Black does that. In this variation, he attacks the pawn with the knight move knight b8, c6. And white defends the pawn with knight goes to f3. After which black completely opens up the game with queen to e7. And then we get this position. Here too, there are many possibilities, but for black a very nice variation goes from this position as followed. White develops the bishop from c4 to f4. He defends the pawn once more. Something good to give an extra defending, but this bishop is often used to handle checks given by the black bishop from f8 to b4. Now the black bishop cannot do that because the queen can, and the queen does also. So the queen, it follows queen, e7, b4, check. The black queen gives checks and also threatens to capture the bishop on f4. The best thing now is to bring the bishop back to d2, but white thinks that he can place queen d2 and he will protect the bishop, and when the black queen takes on b2, the white queen can move to c3. She is protecting by the knight on b1, and the queen then protects the rook on a1. So let's take a look at what followed. I thought this was a good move, especially when black decides to exchange the queens. After queen b2 takes queen c3, the knight takes b1 from b1 takes the queen c3, and then you should have this position. And when you look at it, this is what white had in mind. His pawn structure is a disaster, but he has many pieces developed, and that should be a good compensation. But it was not what black played. Instead of 6 queen b2 takes queen c3, black plays bishop f8 to b4. And now white has lost his queen, as you see on this diagram. And in this position, white can again make the mistake of thinking that if he plays the bishop to d2 and the black bishop capture the white queen, then he can capture the black, capture back with the bishop, and then he still protect the rook because the bishop itself is protected by the knight. Well, what is wrong with that thought can be seen in the following diagram. The bishop on c3 cannot be captured because it's protected by the knight on b1. The knight cannot be captured because it's protected by the rook on a1, and the rook cannot be captured because of protected by the bishop on c3. It all seemed to be perfectly correct. Except for one small thing, chess is all about checkmate. And anyone who studies this position carefully will see that black can checkmate white with just one move. So, in the beginning of the video, I thought that players often are so focused on what they see only a part of the board. And that is why they make the mistakes. And why people who are watching the game, seeing the total board, wonder why is they playing like that? Well, this is a position that what bystanders see and what we see in this video on the diagram. But during the game, the white player sees and analyzes only the blue part. And the bishop on f8 is not in that part, and so white does not see it. The fact that we look at and analyze during a game is only a small part of the board is one of the main reasons for our losing games. especially when we are very concentrated on playing. We are then so concentrated on looking at one part of the board, and then suddenly the opponent appears to do something a completely different part of the board, and sometimes, well, we did not see it coming at all. We can prevent this kind of problems by learning from the beginning to look at the entire board and search for possibilities before we look at a move. And learning to constantly look at the entire board and try to see what effect your move has on the entire position will give you many advantages. How to practice this is simple. It starts with always looking at the entire board. And that's only possible when you keep your hands to yourself. I always see the hands sliding over the board and doing so, and they cover several pieces. You can no longer see the total. Only when you know what you are doing to play, then use your hands. So with the hands sliding over the board, players often touch the pieces they want to play, but then they don't. So stick to the rule that when you touch a piece, you have to play with it, regardless of the game. Even if your opponent tells you to play another move, don't do that and just start a new game, if it's too bad. Of course, it's completely different when you analyze a game afterwards. Then you are allowed to move back and try things out on the board, but that's different. For the best exercise, you need 2 chessboards and pieces. On one board, you set up a position. Then in your mind, you perform a number of moves. Now, without looking at the first board, you go to the second board, which is empty, and there you set up the position as you think it will be after those moves. When you've done that, then you go back to the first board and you perform those moves, and then you see to what extent you have set up the correct ending position. This helps you not only to do moves in your mind, it will tell you also whether you had a good understanding of the situation on the board. On the mistakes you made, you can see your own weakness. For example, when you put the knights on the wrong fields, or you forgot a pawn. Was it a double pawn? Well, it's a really great exercise and you will learn a lot. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next and the last video of this series. And when you subscribe, you do us a favor and you will automatically see when we publish it. So, see you in the lang. Tambiet. No, it's hen kaplai.